It happened in the middle of a church service, live streamed, in front of dozens of worshippers. A woman was gunned down in cold blood, and the killer walked out like nothing happened. What no one knew was that this wasn't random. This was personal, and the truth behind it would leave a family shattered forever. January 31st, 2021. In the heart of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, the morning unfolded like any other quiet Sunday. Families in their Sunday best filed into the modest brick church on a sleepy corner of Forsyth County. By 9 a.m., the sanctuary was full. That morning, a few dozen viewers had already joined the broadcast. Online, hearts and praise emojis floated up the screen. Inside, the congregation swayed gently, unaware of what was coming. Then it happened. The first sound didn't register as a gunshot. Not immediately. Some thought it was a speaker malfunction, or maybe a child knocking something over. But then the second shot rang out. Sharper, louder, unmistakable. A scream. Then another. And then panic. Witnesses say it all happened in seconds. A man, unknown, barely noticed before, rose from a back pew and fired again. This time someone shouted. Several congregants dropped to the floor. Others rushed for the exits. The live stream continued rolling, recording only the chaos, the sound of gunfire, scattered screams, the sudden overturning of chairs and feet scrambling. At the front of the church, a woman had collapsed. Several people thought she had fainted, but when members ran to her, they stopped cold. She wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. Evelyn Ward, 51 years old, lay slumped in the aisle, bleeding from multiple wounds to the upper body. The bullet holes in her blouse were visible before anyone even checked for a pulse, and by the time emergency responders arrived, there was nothing they could do. She was pronounced dead inside the church she had faithfully attended for years. The shooter was gone. According to witnesses, he moved quickly, slipped through the rear side doors and into a waiting vehicle parked just a few yards from the entrance. Police were called immediately. Officers cordoned off the scene, blocking nearby roads and redirecting parishioners as forensics teams began their work. Church shoes and Bibles lay scattered on the floor, next to spent shell casings and blood-stained carpet. Outside, people huddled on the sidewalk in silence, many still shaking, others praying through tears. There was no known motive. No one recognized the shooter. No note. No warning. Just a woman dead, a family torn, and a congregation in stunned disbelief. Outside the walls of that church, word began to spread. A woman had been murdered, in front of her entire congregation, while the world watched online. And behind the panic, behind the confusion, was something no one could yet see. Because this was no random act of violence. This was something else. Before the live stream captured a moment that would leave a community speechless, Evelyn Ward was known for entirely different reasons. She had spent more than 2 decades working in the financial sector. Colleagues described her as focused, disciplined, and dependable. She'd earned her way into a leadership position at a regional bank, where she managed credit operations with a reputation for being efficient and fair. Outside of work, Evelyn was described as deeply committed to her faith. She was known to be active in church life, present, supportive, and always willing to volunteer when needed. After relocating from Charlotte to Forsyth County in the latter part of her life, she joined a new congregation where she gradually became a familiar and trusted face. The move to Forsyth wasn't random. It came after she remarried. Her new husband, Leon Carmichael, was a respected man in the community, a tour operator who was a few years older than her. The two reportedly met later in life and married in 2017. Their union brought together 2 separate lives, Evelyn and her son Michael, and Leon with his adult children from a previous relationship. Together, Evelyn and Leon purchased a home in a gated residential area in Winston-Salem, a step that marked what many believed was a new beginning. By most accounts, Evelyn embraced the change. She continued working, maintained her friendships, and remained active in her local church. But those close to the family say blending the two households wasn't seamless. Leon's children were already grown when the couple married. Evelyn, though committed to making the situation work, remained viewed by some as an outsider. The new dynamic didn't erase long-standing ties to Leon's first wife, who had passed away from cancer, and in some corners of the family, the adjustment was difficult. One of Leon's sons, Deshaun Carmichael, maintained a particularly distant relationship with Evelyn. It's not clear whether the tension was ever openly addressed, but those who observed the family noted a persistent coldness in certain interactions. Still, Evelyn remained in the home and continued building her life in Forsyth. Her relationship with her only son, Michael Ward, stayed close. As an adult, he was living independently, but the connection between them appeared strong. Friends of Evelyn's would later share that her conversations often included updates about Michael, and that she remained proud of the man he had become. By all appearances, Evelyn had done what many strive to do: build a stable career, raise a child, recover from earlier life losses, and step into a second chapter with cautious optimism. But just beneath the surface, not everyone was content. Tensions surrounding Leon's estate, his death, and the home he left behind would soon reveal that some within the Carmichael family saw Evelyn not as a wife or even a stepmother, but as an obstacle that needed to be removed. In July 2020, just 6 months before Evelyn Ward was killed, her husband, Leon Carmichael, died unexpectedly in a car accident in Stokes County, North Carolina. Reports later confirmed that his vehicle was struck during a high-speed police chase involving a group of suspects fleeing in a stolen car. Leon was not involved in the pursuit. He was simply on the road at the wrong time. The crash claimed his life on impact. The news came as a devastating shock to his family. Friends described Leon as a reliable and respected man, a father of several adult children, and a longtime community figure. His sudden death left both emotional and legal consequences that would echo far beyond the crash itself. After Leon's funeral, the reading of his will brought immediate attention. According to legal filings, Leon had made provisions for both Evelyn and some of his children. Evelyn, as his surviving spouse, inherited the home they shared in Winston-Salem, along with a portion of his remaining assets. Some of his adult children were included in the estate, though not equally. One of them, Deshaun Carmichael, reportedly received less than what he expected, and less than what others believed he was entitled to. Almost immediately, disagreements began to surface. Family members questioned the terms of the will. Some speculated privately that Leon had been influenced or manipulated during the final years of his life. Others felt the estate had been handled unfairly, with Evelyn benefiting too heavily from decisions they believed should have favored Leon's children. These weren't just quiet frustrations. According to sources close to the family, certain relatives voiced their anger openly. Tensions were particularly high between Evelyn and members of Leon's side of the family. While no official challenges to the will were filed at the time, the resentment was evident in phone conversations, arguments, and strained interactions that followed the funeral. Evelyn, for her part, did not respond publicly to the criticism. She continued living in the home, working at her job, and attending church regularly. Not long after the estate details became public, Evelyn began receiving threatening phone calls and text messages. The numbers were often blocked or unfamiliar. The language used was indirect but menacing. threats to make things right, demands to let go of what's not yours, and vague warnings to watch your back. Some of the messages implied that she had taken more than she deserved. None of them named a sender. Evelyn didn't dismiss them. She took them seriously. Law enforcement later confirmed that she had requested police presence at her husband Leon Carmichael's funeral. The request wasn't widely known at the time, but it was logged, and officers were briefly stationed at the service. Though no incident occurred that day, the fact that she asked for protection raised questions later. Questions about what she feared and who she believed might act on their anger. Still, despite the threats, Evelyn did not retreat. She continued going to work, meeting with friends, and attending her church regularly. On the morning of January 31st, 2021, Evelyn Ward arrived at church as she always did, quietly, without fanfare, and early enough to find her regular seat. It was a typical Sunday service at her local church in Forsyth County. The service was being live-streamed on Facebook, as had become common practice during the pandemic. Everything appeared normal. At approximately 9:10 a.m., a man entered the sanctuary. According to statements later provided by church members, he looked out of place. He wore a hat pulled low and had a handkerchief tied over his nose and mouth, an unusual mask even by pandemic standards. He moved with purpose, but said little, and he took a seat directly behind Evelyn. One church elder would later tell investigators that he noticed the man and felt uneasy. The plan had been to approach him after the service and ask about the improvised face covering and his unfamiliar presence. But that opportunity never came. The worship segment of the service had just begun. Soft music filled the room. People stood. Some swayed. Others clapped. It was a moment of calm. Then, the man stood. Without a word, he reached under his clothing and pulled out a firearm. He aimed it directly at Evelyn and fired multiple times at close range. The first shot caused confusion. The second triggered panic. Within seconds, Evelyn Ward collapsed forward, bleeding from several gunshot wounds to the upper body. By the time church members reached her, she was unresponsive. The shooter didn't linger. He turned and ran out the same door he had entered, heading toward a waiting vehicle parked nearby. But in his rush, he made a critical mistake. Near the seat he had occupied, wedged between the backrest and the cushion, officers later found a smartphone. It had fallen during the chaos and gone unnoticed in the moment. The scene inside the church remained chaotic for several minutes. Emergency services were called. Worshippers gathered outside in stunned silence, unsure of what had just happened. Police secured the area, ushered members away from the building, and began the process of interviewing witnesses. Inside, the device left behind was quickly bagged as evidence. The phone was locked, but to investigators, it was a promising lead, possibly the first real link to whoever had just murdered Evelyn Ward in a room full of people. At that point, the name of the shooter was still unknown. But the phone would not stay silent for long. Investigators were able to access contact logs, text messages, app activity, and location data. The phone led quickly to a name: Reggie Prince, a local construction worker, mid-30s, no criminal history, no known ties to Evelyn. His name had never come up in connection with her family, her workplace, or her church. On paper, he appeared ordinary, but something didn't add up. Investigators traced his movements via GPS history and cell tower pings. The data confirmed that his phone had been in the church building during the exact window of the shooting. That part was undeniable, and although he wasn't on the livestream video, his proximity placed him at the scene. Still, the question remained: why? While officers worked to locate Reggie Prince, another piece of the puzzle surfaced less than 20 miles away. In the Rose Heights neighborhood of Winston-Salem, Patrol officers spotted a white Toyota sedan parked awkwardly along the curb. As they approached, the driver suddenly exited the vehicle and began walking away quickly. Officers questioned him on the spot. He gave a vague explanation, claimed he was waiting for someone who never showed up. Nervous, but not confrontational, he was let go. That vehicle was later flagged. Investigators traced the license plate through rental records. The car had been rented 2 days before the murder by a man named Eric Pitts, a 23-year-old store clerk working at a local hospital. When police contacted him, he said the car had been stolen shortly after he rented it. He claimed he had already reported the theft. But that, too, began to fall apart. There were inconsistencies in his story. The timing of the alleged theft didn't match the timestamp on the vehicle's last known movement. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed someone resembling Eric at the wheel, after the time he said the car had gone missing. The lead tightened. Now, detectives were working 2 names: Reggie Prince, whose phone had been recovered at the scene, and Eric Pitts, who appeared tied to the getaway vehicle but was trying to distance himself with a questionable report. Neither man had any direct connection to Evelyn Ward. Neither had known involvement with her family, her church, or her estate. And yet, both were now at the center of a murder investigation. What investigators didn't know yet was who had hired them. But after several hours in an interrogation room, Eric changed course. Pressed with mounting evidence, he eventually broke. According to the official police report, Eric admitted that he had not been truthful. He confessed that he had driven the white Toyota to the church that morning and picked up a man who had fled the scene after the shooting. That man, he said, was Reggie Prince. Eric told investigators that he had been promised a payout for simply acting as the driver. He insisted that he had no prior knowledge of the shooting itself, that he had been told it was a quick job and nothing more. But as the questioning continued, a new detail emerged. Eric mentioned that someone else had coordinated the arrangement, someone who wasn't at the scene. A name slipped: Deshawn. The reference caught immediate attention. Detectives recognized it as Deshawn Carmichael, the adult son of Evelyn Ward's late husband, Leon Carmichael. According to family statements collected in the weeks after Leon's death, Deshawn had grown increasingly resentful over the terms of his father's will. He had received less than he expected and had voiced his frustration to multiple people. Eric didn't claim to know Deshawn personally, but he told investigators that Reggie had mentioned him as the one making things happen. That detail was enough for detectives to take a closer look. They returned to Reggie Prince's phone, already in evidence, and dug deeper. In his messaging history, investigators found a series of vague conversations with contacts stored under unlisted names. Some of the messages referenced the lady and the house situation. One thread showed a back-and-forth discussion over an amount of money. The language was indirect, but the implication was clear. Someone had offered payment for something to be done. Financial records added weight to the suspicion. An account tied to a relative of Leon Carmichael had recently sent a series of transfers, none large enough to raise alarms on their own, but together they painted a picture. Investigators believed these funds had been used to pay both Reggie and Eric. Though no single piece of evidence directly named Deshawn as the payer, the combination of text messages, Eric's confession, and financial links pointed investigators in one direction. What had started as a routine homicide investigation was quickly transforming into something more complex. This was no longer just about a shooter and a driver. It was becoming a conspiracy. And for the first time, the name Deshawn Carmichael moved from background tension to prime focus. After weeks of building pressure, investigators made their move. Deshawn Carmichael was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder in the death of his stepmother, Evelyn Ward. At the time of his arrest, Deshawn was 29 years old. He had no prior criminal record. He was known in the community as quiet, often keeping to himself. But to investigators, his name had been circling for weeks. What had started as whispers from family members after Leon Carmichael's will was read had now evolved into formal allegations. Allegations that placed him at the center of a murder-for-hire scheme. The theory was clear. Deshawn, bitter over being largely excluded from his father's estate, had allegedly recruited Reggie Prince to carry out the murder, with Eric Pitts serving as the driver. Police argued that Evelyn's continued presence in the family home and control over Leon's assets had made her a target, and Deshawn the likely mastermind behind the plot to eliminate her. But there was a problem, a major one. There were no messages directly tying Deshawn to the murder. No phone calls, no written instructions, no payments sent from his personal bank account to either suspect. Every link in the case was circumstantial, based on timing, testimony, and motive. The prosecution's case relied heavily on cooperation from the other two suspects. Eric Pitts had already accepted a plea deal, admitting his role as the getaway driver and agreeing to testify. His account named Deshawn as the person allegedly behind the plan, but even that detail was second-hand, passed through Reggie. The real hope rested with Reggie Prince. As the shooter, his testimony would carry the most weight. Prosecutors believed that if Reggie cooperated, they could build a case strong enough to secure a conviction. But once in court, everything changed. Reggie refused to testify. Despite facing a potential life sentence, he declined all cooperation with the state. He did not confirm any connection to Deshawn. He did not offer a motive. He said nothing about the money or the messages found on his phone. His silence was total. With no confession, no direct evidence, and a key witness unwilling to speak, the prosecution's case began to unravel. What had once appeared to be a calculated murder for hire began looking, at least legally, like a case built on assumption. Deshawn's defense team leaned heavily into the gaps. They argued that their client had never spoken to Reggie or Eric. They pointed out that the funds traced back to a relative, not Deshawn himself. They emphasized that while he may have been unhappy about the will, there was no proof he had acted on that frustration. The case, once promising, now stood on shaky ground. And as the courtroom waited for the trial to resume, there was growing uncertainty over whether Evelyn Ward's murder would ever lead to full accountability. As the case neared its conclusion, each of the three men accused in connection with Evelyn Ward's murder faced very different outcomes. Eric Pitts, the getaway driver, had already accepted a plea deal. He pled guilty to illegal possession of a firearm and accessory after the fact to murder. In exchange, prosecutors dropped the more serious charges of conspiracy and direct involvement in the killing. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, a decision that drew mixed reactions. Some saw it as lenient, others as a necessary move to secure his testimony. Reggie Prince, the gunman whose phone was found at the scene, was tried separately. With overwhelming physical evidence placing him at the church during the shooting and no defense offered, he pled guilty to murder. On January 25, 2023, he was sentenced to 42 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30. He made no public statement. He offered no explanation. But it was the final outcome in Deshawn Carmichael's case that brought the most controversy. Despite months of investigation, testimony from Eric Pitts, and digital records connecting him indirectly to both men, the prosecution had failed to establish a direct link between Deshawn and the murder. There were no text messages ordering the hit, no audio recordings, no payments tied to his name. With no cooperation from Reggie Prince and no new evidence, the prosecution's case stalled. On July 13, 2023, the presiding judge directed the jury to return a not guilty verdict on all counts. The courtroom fell into silence. Some gasped. Others sat frozen. The reasoning was clear. Without direct proof, the case could not proceed to conviction. Michael Ward, Evelyn's only son, was visibly shaken. He declined interviews. He left the courtroom without comment, surrounded by quiet supporters and close friends. Reporters noted that he waved off cameras and covered his face as he exited. For him, it was not just the end of a trial. It was the end of any legal accountability for the man he believed was responsible for his mother's death. Many in the community shared that frustration. To them, the circumstantial evidence felt strong enough. The motive seemed clear. The connections, though indirect, pointed in one direction. But under the law, suspicion alone wasn't enough. The verdict divided opinions across Forsyth County. Some believed justice had been served by securing convictions for the shooter and the driver. Others saw the not guilty verdict as a failure to protect victims when the crime is well planned, and the orchestrator keeps his hands clean. What remained undisputed was the result. Evelyn Ward was dead. 2 men were in prison. And the one name that had hovered over the case for years walked free. In time, the case faded from headlines. But among those who knew Evelyn, it remained a reference point, a painful reminder of how family ties can bend, and in some cases, break beyond repair. Evelyn Ward's story became more than just a headline or a courtroom drama. It became a cautionary tale. A tale about what happens when grief and money collide, when estate disputes turn into personal vendettas, when bitterness is allowed to grow quietly behind closed doors, and when the people who are supposed to protect each other don't. Was Evelyn's murder a crime of hate, or a legacy of family wounds no one ever healed? That's a question her community still lives with.